All right, welcome into the Five Guys here on the Five Reasons YouTube channel. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. We got our friend Alex Donno. You can follow him at Alex Donno. We are sponsored here today in part by our friends over at Water Cleanup of Florida. You can find them at WCUFL.com. Michael Robert and his team, they will take very good care of you. If you find a leak in your place of business or your home, they will jump on it right away. Reach out to them before it gets worse. Of course, they can handle the preventative stuff as well, but you always want to do that early proactive stuff. Otherwise, again, the damage assessment, they'll work with you with the insurance companies and all of that. They cover mold, all that kind of stuff. They can handle all of it, the water mitigation, the dry out. Water Cleanup of Florida, based in Boca Raton. They service the entire Tri-County area. So check them out at WCUFL.com. Again, that's Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz, they've got the guts. Now, I don't know if we have the guts to do this here. Let's see.
I got the guts.
You got the guts. We've dragged this thing out now for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, seems like 10 weeks. Our top 10 list, and here again, for those who are not familiar with the rules of this, and we will take your comments here as we go forward. First thing has to be someone who played in South Florida for one of the team sports. We got some Serena Williams and some Greg Norman and some of that, and it's just too difficult. I mean, there's lots of people who've lived down here in South Florida. There's some who've grown up in South Florida. We respect them. You could argue Serena was the greatest athlete who's ever come out of this area, lived in this area regularly. But again, we're not doing that. Okay, we're focusing on the pro teams. We even eliminated Inter because they haven't been around long enough, and Messi's not ours. So really, we were talking about the 4 pro teams, and you had to be with one of them for at least the past 3 years. Okay, so we're going to go through our list. We went through, kind of got it down to about 20 the last time, but we're going to go 10 through 1 here. So I'm going to let you start. Your number 10 is who?
Yeah, my number 10, I go with Roberto Luongo. And for me, it's an easy thing. And I know not everybody's a hockey fan. I am a hockey fan and Florida Panthers fan. But just when I think about who is synonymous with that organization, the first name, face, and that great head of hair of his that pop into my head are Luongo, right? And you know, he did, obviously, he left, or he got traded to Vancouver, but then he ended up coming back, and he desperately wanted to come back. Like he really pushed for that trade because he missed South Florida. He wanted to be back here, got to finish his career down here, got to, get into the playoffs late in his career with the Florida Panthers, and he's still part of the organization to this day, and was an awesome goalie. So I decided the man who, to me and to a lot of people, really is synonymous with that organization and had a very good career down here, I go with Bobby Lou at number 10.
Strongly considered on my part. Had him in my top 15 to 20. I did want to get a Panther on there. And I also wanted to get a Marlin on there, which I tried. I endeavored. I ended up with Giancarlo Stanton at number 11.
Just missed the cut.
Just missed the cut. And I went that direction in part because look, Dontrell had like the sensation, right? It clearly was. Sheffield obviously was part of a World Series team here, was probably the best player on it in 97. We could talk about guys like Lowell and Conine, who are synonymous in terms of being good guys who represented the organization well while they were here. Miggy, I just can't do the Miggy thing because, again, you're talking about 5 seasons here versus 16 in Detroit. I mean, damn Jeffrey Luria, right? Like, I mean, otherwise he would have been. I mean, he's clearly one of the top 5 to 6 in terms of overall athletes who've played down here. But again, it was 5 years. I can't do it. So if I had any Marlin, it was going to be Stanton because he is their all-time leader in homers in 267. And he did have that summer. He had that summer where he was going for 60 home runs. And he was a reason to go to the ballpark for all of that period of time. But I don't have him there.
But by the way, let me just say, because you hold on, but before you give your number 10, because you gave your number 11. My number 11, and this is, I changed up a couple things, Ethan, after reflecting on everything we talked about on Tuesday. I actually ended up leaving Sasha Barkov off my list and putting him at number 11. If he finishes the job, though, if he and the Panthers finish, they're 7 wins away from a Stanley Cup. If he finishes the job, I will redo my list and put him on there. But I decided to keep him off, but I did go with Luongo at 10.
I have Barkov at 10.
Wow.
Yeah. So my reason for flipping it is this:
Yeah.
Barkov is synonymous with team success here. That was my line in terms of him and Luongo. That you can argue in the legacy of greats in the NHL. Probably Bure actually ranks ahead of both of them,
Yeah.
but you can argue Luongo because of a lot of because of the success in Vancouver, to be honest, and getting to a Stanley Cup final there. But there was not the success here. Whereas with Barkov as the captain, as the core player on the team, they have been really, really good. I mean, they're on the verge of a second straight Stanley Cup Finals, and he's the constant. Like, we can talk about Verhaeghe, we can talk about Reinhart this year, we can talk about what Huberdeau did previously, or any of that. But to me, it's been Barkov, and so I'm gonna say I'm putting him in regardless of what happens here. To me, he cemented it with the last series, particularly at the
Yeah.
tail end of that last series. So I have him as 10, and I'll just be straight on this. That's the last of the Panthers and Marlins that I have. I really wanted to get somebody else on there, but there is a strike against everyone, some of which
Yeah.
not decision, but that they were just not here very long enough. So that's it. So we are basically in a Heat and Dolphins situation here. And I'll give you my number 9 on those. I'll go with Larry Zonka at 9. Um, Again, felt like I needed somebody from the 72 team. He is the face of it. You again, you can argue that Dwight Stevenson was better at his particular position. Didn't play that long. Zonka left too,
Yeah.
but there wasn't the winning with. I mean, there was some. Playing with Danny, obviously, and they did get to a Super Bowl. But I could not put. Well, they got to 2 Super Bowls, I guess. But I could not put Stevenson ahead of Zonka. I'll give it 1 for the old guys, even as much as I kind of wanted to eliminate him from the list to just get another Heat player.
Of course. Okay, so for my number 9, this is another one where I made some radical changes, Ethan, after we did kind of our preliminary talks on Tuesday. I just like I really I got emotional about this one when I'm compiling my list. I just decided I can't do this top 10 without putting Udonis Haslem in it. So I put Udonis, I put UD as my number 9. He was never the best or second best, maybe not even the third best player for the Miami Heat during his run. But again, I go back to talking about how synonymous I feel Roberto Luongo is to the Panthers organization. Udonis Haslem is that and more with the Miami Heat. And it's not like he wasn't a good player down here. I mean, the whole Dirk Stopper thing, he was a big part of that 2006 championship and then played here, another 15, 16 years after that. So I'm going UD. I couldn't keep Mr. 305 off my list. He's number 9 for me.
This is crazy for me because, again, I love UD personally and professionally, and I probably got to know him as well as just about any other athlete down here, and yet I couldn't top 10 him.
Wow.
I wanted to, but the Heat list is too deep for me.
Because for me,
And,
I just decided I couldn't. I tried to on Tuesday, like, keep emotions out of it, but I just decided I couldn't keep emotions
no,
out
and
of my list.
I get it. I entirely get it. But and there are. It's not like, again, he was not an important player. He was. I mean, they probably don't win the 06 championship without him. They had a great run during 05. He stuck around for the big 3. He started during the 27-game winning streak. He was a starter.
Yeah.
And again, the way he fought back, and you're kind of talking me into it here as I'm talking, but honestly, my tough decision was actually between Tim Hardaway and Chris Bosh. No, I'm sorry. I didn't get to Hardaway or Bosh. Those 2 I had to leave off. So
Did
Hardaway
I.
and Bosh,
I left those both off as well.
Hardaway and Bosh I left off. In fact, I had Hardaway at
Yeah.
number 12, and Bosh at number 13. So you're right. I did not get to any of those. I have Shaq at 8.
I left him off.
Yeah, I know, and I kind of felt you going that direction, and I understand it, and the idea that I would pick Shaq over UD when I have much warmer feelings towards UD. And I know the way it ended, but I also remember the way it began. And he brought an excitement back to the organization. He is a larger-than-life figure. I know that he is not considered to be Miami's. I agree with you on that. It is LA first and Orlando second. Totally. At least it's ahead of Cleveland and Boston. But I can't. I can't ignore, the way that he arrived, what he promised, and the reality is it was delivered. And I honestly, and the other thing about it is, even if he was a decoy in that finals, his presence helped unlock Dwyane Wade, who is going to be one of the top 2 on our list. And he really made them, really for the first time, an international organization. I like, if you look at, they were under Zoe and Timmy and all that, they were like the scrappy team that could, and that's kind of why I put him ahead of Timmy. They were the scrappy team that could, but then ultimately didn't. And I just but they were like a local thing that Pat was building. They were kind of an extension of Pat's Knicks. But then when Shaq came, it was like, oh, they're an extension of the Lakers. Like, that's a big deal. And so I went with Shaq at 8, even though, again, I kind of held my nose doing it because I did not like the way he left. And I think a lot of people have kind of colored over that over time. But I'm going to have him at number 8.
All right, so my number 8, I'm not going to say a whole lot because you just had him, I think, number 9 on your list, or number 10 maybe. Larry Zonka. I go with my number 8. I had even kind of toyed with the idea of ranking him higher just because he was part of the first major sports championship team, and a big part of that down here. But I did realize my list, I will allow a few of my biases to come in, and Zonka doesn't mean I appreciate the history, but since I literally wasn't born when the 72 season was happening, like I can't in good conscience rank him higher than certain players who I did really witness their runs firsthand. So I went with Zonk at number 8.
Understood. All right. So number 7, you have?
Number 7 for me is Zach Thomas, another Dolphin. And, I'm glad he finally got into the Hall of Fame. It was long overdue for Zach. He was really an inspiration to me watching him throughout my middle school into my college. Actually, I was either middle school through like adult life because I covered Zach, which was crazy. Yeah. So he was around for a really, really long time. And I always loved how he was such just a lethal linebacker in the NFL, despite all of the size restraints. What was he, 5'8", 5'9"?
Right.
I mean,
5'2", right? Exactly.
Maybe. So yeah, I mean, Zach Thomas to me, he was always a staple throughout my young adult years.
I love Zach. I have him 7 also. I will say that again, I covered his very first practice, so there's some fondness there. The most humble star I ever covered, probably would ever cover. I still don't think he even considers himself to be a star, which is really remarkable. His generosity with us as media. I remember the Zach Thursdays. He'd stay for 20 minutes. I remember also after games, he would clearly be concussed. I remember, which is sad because I hope it doesn't come back to him in later years. But, I remember a goal line stand against Atlanta where he made 3 of the tackles. He didn't know where he was after that game. And yet, again, incredibly generous with his time, just a very good human being. But beyond that, an inspiration. I mean, I just feel like he was, look, there were more 54 jerseys than anything else but 13 jerseys during that period of time. The other guy was probably had a higher peak, and that's why he went into the Hall of Fame first. But Zach was the more identifiable person. Zach was not as pretty as the other guy. I think that, and again, I have love for the other guy too, who we'll get to. I'm just not mentioning his name because obviously we're holding him out. Pudge Rodriguez, by the way, cap for life, we cannot include because we had the 3-year rule, so he was only
that's
here
right.
1 year. Yeah. So we had to draw the line somewhere. But to me, again, Zach embodies everything that you want a leader in your team to be. I wish he'd been treated better at the end. People forget about that. I always tell this story. On the day that he got cut, I was teaching a class at St. Thomas.
Was that Parcells? Like who was it that did that?
It was Ireland.
Ireland and Parcells did,
and he didn't get along with he didn't get along with Nick either. Actually, it was Jason who got along with Nick, but Zach did not. But when Zach got cut, I remember I was teaching class at St. Thomas. He called me 3 times to make sure I had everything I needed, because he was calling beat guys who had covered him for a long time. It's just personification of class.
Wow.
If I had to include one who, again, would be a personal bias based on my liking of them as human beings, I would have had to decide between Zach and UD. And frankly, Zach had, and I think UD would acknowledge this, had the better career, even though shorter. He was a higher end player. And so that's why I went with Zach. All right. Before we get to the break here, number 6. And I struggled with this a lot. And I actually think that this could change this year. But I have Jimmy 6.
So do I.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah.
I have Jimmy 6,
and we did not compare notes, just so people know.
We did not. I have Jimmy 6, whereas I'm going to have somebody else 5, even though Jimmy had more team success, because it's a struggle actually to make the argument, honestly. But I put, I'll just say it here. I have Jason Taylor 5th, and I went back and forth on this a lot. Jason was literally the best player at a premium position for probably a 3-year period. It wasn't all back-to-back years, but certainly the 2002 season, the 18.5 sacks, etc. Also, they drafted Jason. I do think that matters in terms of this discussion a little bit, to go from a 3rd-round pick to where he went. But I will say this. If Jimmy can be more available this year and be available to do the things in the postseason he's done in the past, I think Jimmy can move up to top 4 on this list. I just couldn't after the season. Maybe I'm colored by the season we just saw, but I was not happy with Jimmy's kind of approach to this past season. And it wasn't so much the games missed, it was the games played. And so I just have a feeling this isn't going to end that well, particularly with some of Pat's comments. And so that's why ultimately I went with JT over Jimmy, but I would have them 5 and 6.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for me why, Jimmy is just in the bottom half, he was my number 6 as well. It just basically has to do with the people that I rank above him are either championship winners down here or, someone who just is more part of the fabric of South Florida. My number 5, actually, Ethan, I have a feeling I know, I guess that I ranked him lower than you did. I go with LeBron James at number 5. Now,
yeah, I don't.
LeBron James, along with Lionel Messi, who's disqualified from the list because he hasn't been here long enough. Like I'd say the reason why LeBron is not higher on my list, because he and Messi are the 2 greatest athletes to ever put on the uniform of a South Florida team. LeBron's just not higher for me only because he's not synonymous enough with this organization, right? I mean, you said the same thing about Shaquille O'Neal, right? When people outside of South Florida think of LeBron, you think of him, more as a Cavalier. Obviously, the recency bias would be towards the Lakers, but most people towards the Cavs. And then the Heat are somewhere either 2nd and 3rd in that thinking, right? So, had LeBron spent more time here and become more synonymous, if he had the guts, he would be ranked higher on my list than number 5.
Yeah. Let me address that after the break, because I have some thoughts on that, because I weighed it quite a bit. Before we get to our sponsor here, I want to tell you that addition to what we're going to show you in this ad, Jerseys 305. Make sure you're checking out Jerseys _305 on Instagram. If you buy a Panthers jersey from them, I believe this is still going on. I think Jose will let me know. But if you check them out on the Instagram page or go to the website. If you buy a Panthers jersey for them and they win the cup, and they're 7 wins away from doing that at this point, it's free. You'll get your money returned. It's a pretty great deal. So check it out. A little bit more about them here. Hey, it's Ethan Skolnick for the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We've got a great new sponsor that fits with us perfectly. It's called jerseys305.com. That's jerseys305.com. This is your home for dead stock and vintage jerseys from the Heat, Panthers, Dolphins, Marlins, and the other local teams. Their mission was born from a passion for wearing jerseys of the old styles and the past players. Jerseys 305 aims to make every fan stand out from the crowd with unique pieces that you don't commonly see anymore. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, but not today. And Jerseys 305 was created by the fans, for the fans. They're diehards just like you. In fact, they're probably listening to this episode right now. So check them out, Jerseys 305, their partnership with 5 Reasons Sports, celebrating with a 10% discount on the next purchase using the code 5 at checkout. Unlock your exclusive savings on the entire vintage collection. I know that our guy has some of these jerseys ready for you, by the way, too. So some of the jerseys we're talking about, that's right in his wheelhouse. So make sure that you reach out to him and get your jerseys today. They're flying. He can't get enough of them, but he'll get you more. All right. So here's where I'm at with this. You had LeBron 5, is that correct?
5, yeah.
Okay. I had JT 5.
Right.
I'll just let you know right now. I have Zoe 4 and LeBron 3. So
I've got Zoe 4 as well, by the way.
Okay. So so basically we just flipped the LeBron thing here.
Yeah.
With JT, correct? Is that what we did? You have JT third, is that right?
Yeah. How'd you know?
Okay.
I haven't even said that yet. How you're like
No, no,
predicting
I
my list.
guessed it. I guessed it because I'm
Well, I
going
get it
ahead.
makes sense because you know who's in my top 2. So yeah,
Right,
that's
right. I
fair.
mean, obviously, right. So, I mean, there were only really two options there. Well, I look. So,
Yeah.
again, this is kind of crazy because again, I know both fairly well, and I understand that JT is more associated with Miami, as is Zoe, than LeBron is. But here's where I always push back on LeBron stuff because I was there covering those four teams and particularly that first year. LeBron may not be associated with the Miami Heat. He might have left the Miami Heat in a way that people were not happy with and will never be happy with. Okay. But he did come here. And he came here when nobody wanted him to. And he became public enemy number one. And he did embrace the city while he was here. Did he do as much of the charity stuff here as Akron? No. But he did the bike ride with Dwyane. He did some Boys and Girls Club stuff. He was Miami. We embodied something different during those 4 years from a sports perspective. Now it's back to this scrappy, Heat group, whatever that, because again, the other teams don't rate at the same level as the Heat nationally. And so we're now like, Jimmy Butler's plucky underdogs, but we were not there for 4 years. Like for 4 years, it was the most hated city on earth. Nobody wanted to be here. It was us against the world, and he was the face of it. And the thing I will say about LeBron, and I will defend him on this until the end of time, regardless of how he left and all the rest of this stuff. He played hard every single time he played. He played every available game that he could play. He did not want to sit. Okay, again, that's part of my issue. That's why I will always have a problem putting Jimmy ahead of him unless Jimmy delivers a championship here. He was available. He was, and whatever his motivations were, whether it was to prove the world wrong or prove he's the best player in the world, maybe it wasn't for the team on the front of the jersey. Okay, whatever it was. Okay, he put on an effing show every single time he was on the floor. And he did it for this. He did it while in this city. He has maintained relationships with the players he played with on those teams. They had crazy respect for him. I can't put him lower than 3. I just can't. He came promising to deliver championships, got to 4 finals. The first one was his fault. Okay.
Yeah.
The last one was not his fault. The last one, he was to the level. The other guys were not. And so probably should have had 3. And we'll never see a sensation like that again. So I just can't. Now, as far as Zoe goes, again, Zoe didn't start as ours. He is the foundation. He is the pillar. He did win a championship. And he did contribute to that. So it's not like he was just an end of the bench guy. He was a big factor. He played better than Shaq during a lot of that series. But again, he didn't win it as the lead guy. When he was the lead guy, they kept coming up short. We'll never know what would have happened after they reshaped the team in the 2000 offseason. But ultimately, again, that's left to debate. And he did leave angry that time and saying a lot of negative things about the organization. So all of that was patched. And I greatly respect Zoe. He is, to me, the foundation piece and always will be. And he was Pat's, we used to say, he was basically Pat's, we're not going to use the word puppet. I don't like that because Zoe's his own man. But he was an embodiment of Pat. Like when he would say, when he would speak, you heard Pat. It just took a lot longer for Zoe to say it because he kind of would answer one question in 15 minutes. But it was, adversity introduces a man to himself. And we heard all these phrases. They were Pat phrases. He set the culture. Udonis carried the culture. But I can't put him ahead of a guy who made this the greatest show on earth for 4 years. I have LeBron third.
Yeah, I just the reason why I put Zoe ahead of LeBron, it's purely emotional, right? I mean, I can't begin to argue, who's the better basketball player without landing on LeBron 100 out of 100 times. I get that. I remember when that 2006 championship was won, and like you said, he played a role in that. And when that championship was won, obviously the headliner was Dwyane Wade for just how insanely well he played in that Dallas series. But when that championship was secured, the guy that I felt the best for was Alonzo Mourning. I just remember how, after having gone through the kidney illness and him making that incredible comeback, my heart was so warmed by that. And I remember just watching him celebrate with the championship parade, watching him get off the plane. I think I don't know if this was an urban legend or if this was correct. Didn't like, because he had all the kidney transplant and stuff. Didn't his doctor give him like special permission to drink alcohol like that? Well, just to celebrate, because obviously after kidney transplant, alcohol is probably not the best idea. But Zoe, you get special permission from the doctor. I just stuff like that for me. It's purely emotional, obviously, but that's why I rank Zoe ahead of LeBron.
All right, fair. And again, I think that's an interesting debate. We should probably that's one I probably should pull going forward. All right, so we're left with two. We knew who we'd be left with to the point that you put it in the title here. Marino or Wade in Miami sports history. And I'll just say this, okay? If you're simply comparing peak, all right, it's still Dan, even though Dwyane should have been MVP of the 08-09 season, and even though Dwyane had one of the 5 best NBA Finals performances in history. It's still Dan because Dan did something in 1984 that will never be replicated. It's not going to happen again. And particularly, it's happened statistically, but it's not going to happen under those circumstances. Under the old rules, when cornerbacks could actually defend, because the rules allowed them to. And that season, he was literally like nothing the league has ever seen. Dwyane was not that. He was close to it. But there are some who believe that Dan is still the greatest quarterback who's ever played. Now, again, Brady, others, Mahomes now, over time that fades a little bit. Nobody's ever said Dwyane was the greatest player to ever play. What we will say is that he was the 3rd best shooting guard or 2 guard. I never liked the phrase shooting guard because that really wasn't necessarily his thing. But the best off guard, 2 guard, athletic guard in NBA history, probably be 3rd. Okay. But this pushes for a couple of reasons. One, beyond Dan's control to some degree, which is the championships, because Dwyane, we can argue against the 12 and 13 championships because Dwyane was not the best player on that team, but he was the best player in 06, even with what Shaq provided. And Dan staying here the whole time, I think, is a feather in his cap.
That's what made this so hard for me. Like, and I went back and forth on this so much, Ethan, and that's one of those things that I kept thinking about, that you never saw Dan in another uniform.
Right. It's hard. I understand it because we try not to think about Chicago and Cleveland. It's the wife comes back to you, but you still remember where she went during the meantime. It's a tough one. But again, I come back around to the idea that, and maybe this is generational at this point. Maybe it's that I've covered the Heat more. I just think now we're looking at it where Dwyane Wade, I still see on the street more 3 jerseys than 13s. Now you go to the stadium on Sunday, and yes, it's still a lot of 13. Some of that is because they haven't had, other than 99 and 54, a whole bunch, and now 10. Maybe a whole bunch of players worth celebrating during the past 20 years. But Dwyane won the titles, and also it's not just that Dwyane won the titles and basically led them to the main title in 06, the first one, but he also brought the guys here who got them the second and the third one. And right. And it's just tough. It's like, I keep wanting to say, look, Dan is the greatest spectacle we've ever seen down here, and people are too young to remember it. And everybody has been compared to Dwyane since, and nobody is ever going to measure up. And it's all of that. But like, I don't know. It's just Dwyane is, you see the look on kids' faces, even now, when you mention Dwyane Wade, who has now not really played at a high level for almost a decade, if you include retirement. And yet it's still Dwyane's city, even if he doesn't want to live here anymore. I don't know. And Dan lives here. So that's another thing. I mean, Dan lived here, and I know Dwyane had other reasons, but that's, I push slightly to Dwyane.
So do I. And this is, and again, like all the criteria you mentioned, I had to figure out just for me, couple things. I know that, like, you could obviously, as I know you have before argued in recent years, has it become more of a basketball town than a football town? Like, my roots here are, I still consider Miami to be a football town. And if the Dolphins ever win another Super Bowl in my lifetime, the celebration is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I had to figure, like, how much does that go into my equation? how much, as we mentioned, the fact that Marino, never actually left. I know he came close to it at one point, but he never wore another NFL jersey outside of a Miami Dolphins jersey, where Dwyane Wade did wear 2 other jerseys. Those were things that I thought about, but I kept going back to the championships, Ethan. And, listen, I know Marino wasn't entirely to blame for the fact that he didn't get any rings during his career, but Dwyane Wade has 3, was the best player for one of those. Marino didn't get any. So it came down to that trumping the other things. Right. So I that's why I decided to lean with Wade. I gave it a long, hard thought, and, growing up a Dolphin fan. I mean, I grew up a Dolphin and Heat fan. I was like 5 years old when the Heat franchise was instituted, but, football meant like more to me at that point in my life. And I had the Marino posters, growing up during his prime and all that, but still, I give the slight edge to Wade for everything we talked about. It was hard. It was.
I'll give you close with this, and so you and I end up on the same page, even with a couple of differences. And check out the 305 jerseys and also water cleanup. I'll say this: this is what got me. Okay, I remember 3 of these guys were in one place. Okay, in an event I covered. Our friend Seth Levitt, running Jason Taylor Foundation, and when they had a golf tournament at Grand Oaks, which was Jason's tournament. Zach was not at this one. I think he took up golf later. Zach was not at this one, but Jason was there. Zoe was there. Dan was there. And I remember catching up with Dan there. Again, I covered like the last 3 years of Dan's career where he really didn't say anything. He wasn't happy. He didn't really remember. He didn't know me that well at that point, but he would see me at events after. And he knew that I primarily covered the Heat. And Dan, of course, is a Heat fan. But
yeah.
But the reason Dan really became a Heat fan was Dwyane Wade. Okay. And this is what tilts it for me, because I was at this tournament and I remember catching up with Dan on the greens. And I said, he said, I got to get out of here. And I said, why? He says, we're done. He says, why? I got to go watch Dwyane tonight. And so to me, that was, and I'm trying to remember what year this was, but this might have been around that 08, 09 type time. Cause it was pre Big 3. It's before LeBron got here. And to me, that says it all. Not that Dwyane wouldn't have wanted to see Dan in his prime, but just to put into some context, like this is not like Dwyane Wade, mascot and recruiter. Like Dwyane Wade at that point was an elite show, carrying a team by himself, who was absolutely must see television at that point and must see in person, even for the guy who some still, and rightly so, could consider the greatest athlete to ever play down here. And so that's where I go Dwyane. I never really got a chance to tell Dwyane that story, but I kind of feel like he would appreciate it. But that's what I come away with. So we'll see. I don't know that Dan is saying I got to go see Barkov, but again, if they win a championship, I'm with you.
And maybe he wants to go see Bob. I mean, shut out last night. Yeah.
Bob's one of the great resurrection stories in South Florida sports history, because people wanted that contract the hell out of here. And now he may be headed towards his second NBA, excuse me. And I see where my head's at, basketball town, Stanley Cup finals. All right. Thanks to Alex. Check out Jerseys 305. We'll be back next week. Probably have more hockey coverage if we do. And then we'll start gearing up a little bit along with 5 on the floor for the NBA draft. A good one, everybody.